Everyone mocked the obese bride, until a virgin rancher said, "She's built for me." The church bell tolls. Dust swirls through the open doors. A bride stands at the altar, trembling as the groom spits his shame and the crowd erupts in cruel laughter. Her heart shatters in front of the whole town. Then boots scrape the floorboards. A quiet rancher, never known to court a soul, steps forward. His voice cuts through the jeers. "She's built for me," the church gasps. But this sudden vow is only the beginning. Behind the whispers and gossip lies a fight for land, water, and dignity. And secrets buried in old contracts could tear their fragile union apart. As drought grips the valley and neighbors turn to enemies, can this unlikely marriage, born from shame and courage, stand strong enough to silence a town and save everything they hold dear? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more through the stained glass windows of the little frontier church. Morning sunlight cast rainbow patterns across Sarah Jane Miller's borrowed calico dress. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers, their stems wrapped in a faded blue ribbon. The wooden floorboards beneath her feet seemed to sway like the deck of a ship as whispers rippled through the crowded pews behind her. "Too big for any man," came one harsh whisper. "Poor thing," murmured another voice. Dripping with false pity, Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the rough-hewn cross mounted on the wall, trying to draw strength from its weathered surface. The widower beside her, Gerald Thompson, shifted his weight, his boots scraping against the floor. She could feel his gaze sliding over her like oil on water. Assessing and judging Dot, the preacher cleared his throat, his Bible open in his work-worn hands. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." "No." Gerald's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. "No, I won't do it." Sarah's heart stuttered in her chest. The flowers in her hands began to tremble more violently. Gerald stepped away from her, his lip curled in disgust. "I won't yoke myself to such a burden. Look at her, she'd eat me out of house and home inside a month." Laughter rippled through the congregation, some nervous, some cruel. Sarah's face burned hot enough to scorch, while her heart turned to ice in her chest. She had known this was a mistake, had felt it in her bones when her father arranged the match. But she had prayed that maybe this time, the preacher faltered, slowly closing his Bible with a soft thump that echoed in Sarah's ears like thunder. She gathered her skirts, ready to flee down the aisle and never show her face in town again. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the church began to swing shut, the hinges creaking like they were weeping. Wait, the single word rang out clear and strong. Sarah froze, her heart leaping into her throat as boots scuffed against wood, and a tall figure rose from the back pews. Liam Boone stood there, his Sunday hat clutched in his calloused hands, his usually shy face set with determination. "She's built for me," he declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the church. "If she have me, I'll take her home," gasped filled the air as Liam walked forward, his steps measured and steady. Sarah watched him approach through eyes that burned with unshed tears. She knew Liam Boone by sight, everyone did. The quiet rancher who lived alone on his spread outside town, who stammered when forced to speak in public, and blushed whenever the marriage minded. Widows tried to catch his eye. Now he moved with purpose, his shoulders straight and his chin lifted. When he reached the front of the church, he turned to face Sarah. His eyes met hers, warm and honest as a summer sky. "Miss Miller," he said softly, "I ain't got much to offer except my name and my land. But I'll work hard every day to be worthy of you if you'll consent to be my wife." Sarah's throat closed tight with emotion. She searched his face for any sign of mockery or cruel humor, but found only earnest hope and something that might have been admiration in his steady gaze. The preacher cleared his throat. "Miss Miller, do you accept Mr. Boone's offer?" Sarah looked at Liam's outstretched hand, broad and strong from years of ranch work. Beyond him, she could see Gerald Thompson's sneering face, could feel the weight of the congregation's stares. But Liam's eyes never wavered from hers, patient and kind. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, I will." She placed her hand in Liam's, and his fingers closed around hers with gentle strength. A few more gasps and whispers rustled through the church, but Sarah barely heard them. All she could focus on was the warmth of Liam's hand around hers and the small, sweet smile that curved his lips. "Well then," the preacher said, opening his Bible once more, "let us proceed with the ceremony." The familiar words of the marriage service washed over Sarah like warm rain. She stood straight and tall beside Liam, no longer trying to make herself smaller. His quiet presence beside her felt like shelter after they exchanged rings, Liam's mother's simple gold band that he pulled from his vest pocket. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was clear and strong as he repeated the vows. Sarah's own voice shook, but she spoke each word with conviction, hardly daring to believe this moment was real. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared at last. "You may kiss your bride." Liam's cheeks flushed pink, but he turned to Sarah with determination. His kiss was gentle and quick, barely more than a brush of lips. But it sealed their union as surely as any passionate embrace could have done as they turned to face the congregation. Sarah caught sight of Gerald Thompson's thunderstruck expression and felt a flutter of something like triumph in her chest. Liam's hand found hers again, squeezing softly as if to say he understood that the walk down the aisle seemed both endless and over in a heartbeat. Some faces they passed were shocked, others disapproving, a few showing genuine happiness. But Sarah kept her head high, drawing strength from Liam's steady presence beside her. Outside, the morning sun had grown warmer, gilding the dusty street and the hitching post where horses dozed. Liam's wagon waited nearby, the horses stamping patiently in their harness. "I know it ain't much," Liam said quietly as he helped Sarah up onto the wooden seat. "But I promise you'll always have a home with me, Sarah Jane." Sarah looked at him. This quiet man who had done what no one else ever had, seen her worth and declared it before the whole world. Her heart swelled with gratitude and something that felt like hope. "It's more than enough," she answered, and was rewarded with another of his small, sweet smiles as Liam climbed up beside her and took up the reins. Sarah heard the church doors open behind them and the sound of people beginning to spill out onto the street. But for the first time in her life, she didn't worry about what they might be saying. She sat tall beside her new husband, the morning breeze cooling her cheeks and carrying the scent of sage and promise. The wagon wheels creaked as they started forward, beginning the journey to their new life together. Sarah's borrowed calico dress rustled in the wind, and her wildflower bouquet shed a few petals that danced away on the breeze like bright bits of hope taking wing. The preacher wasted no time, opening his Bible again with practiced efficiency. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he found the familiar passages, but his voice rang clear and strong through the stunned silence of the church. "Dearly beloved," he began anew. "We are gathered here in the sight of God, double quotes." Sarah stood beside Liam, her borrowed calico dress rustling softly with each shallow breath. The wooden floor beneath her feet felt unsteady, as if the whole world had tilted on its axis. Just minutes ago, she had faced complete humiliation. Now she stood here with a different man, about to become his wife. The congregation watched in scandalized silence, their faces a blur of wide eyes and pursed lips. Sarah forced herself to focus on the preacher's words instead of their stares. She couldn't help wondering if this sudden marriage was an act of kindness or desperation, perhaps. The thought made her chest tighten with uncertainty. When the time came to speak her vows, Sarah's voice quivered like a leaf in autumn. "I, Sarah Jane Miller, take thee, Liam Boone, double quotes." The words caught in her throat, but she pushed them out one by one, determined to finish what she'd started. Beside her, Liam's steady presence gave her strength, though she could feel the slight tremor in his hands when they touched. Liam's voice was quiet but unwavering as he repeated his own vows. From his vest pocket, he produced a simple brass ring, nothing fancy, just a plain band that caught the dim light filtering through the church windows. As he slipped it onto her finger, his hand was warm against hers, though she could feel his nervousness in the slight shake of his fingers. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared, closing his Bible with a soft thump that seemed to echo in this silent church. Liam offered his arm to Sarah. and together they turned to face the congregation. The walk down the aisle felt endless. Sarah kept her eyes forward, but she couldn't block out the whispers that followed them like angry wasps. Virgin Liam, someone muttered from the back pews, followed by a poorly stifled snicker. He has no idea what he's gotten himself into. More whispers rippled through the crowd, some pitying, others cruel. Sarah's cheeks burned, but Liam's step never faltered. He guided her steadily toward the church doors, his jaw set in a determined line. Outside, the morning sun was harsh and bright after the dim interior of the church. Liam's wagon waited at the hitching post, the horse switching its tail lazily at flies. Sarah clutched her small satchel, all she had been able to pack for what was supposed to be her wedding to Gerald Thompson, as Liam helped her up onto the wooden seat dot as they started down the dusty main street. The town seemed to have come alive with curiosity. Women peered out from behind lace curtains in the general store, not even trying to hide their stares. Outside the barbershop, a cluster of boys lounged against the hitching posts, pointing and laughing as the wagon passed. "Hey, Miss Miller," one of them called out. Or should we say Mrs. Boone now? Their mocking laughter followed the wagon down the street. Liam kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, his hands steady on the reins. He offered no explanation, no defense against the town's judgment. Instead, he simply reached over and rested his hand on top of hers where it lay in her lap. The gesture was protective, almost defiant in its simplicity. The wagon creaked and swayed as they left the town behind, following a well-worn trail that wound through rolling prairie grass. Sarah watched the buildings grow smaller and smaller until they disappeared altogether, replaced by vast open spaces dotted with wildflowers and the occasional stunted tree. The sun was low in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and purple when they finally turned onto a narrower track. Ahead, a modest clapboard house came into view, smoke curling lazily from its stone chimney. A barn stood off to one side, its weathered boards silvered with age, while a few chickens scratched in the dusty yard. Liam drew the wagon to a halt in front of the house. "It ain't much," he said softly, the first words he'd spoken since they'd left the church. "But it's home." He climbed down and came around to help Sarah from her seat. His hands were strong and sure as he lifted her to the ground, though he released her quickly once her feet touched earth. Taking her small satchel, he led the way up to the front door. The interior of the house was simple but clean, with worn floorboards that had been recently swept. A black iron cook stove dominated one wall of the kitchen, while a rough-hewn table with 4 chairs stood in the center. On it sat a cold supper, a loaf of bread, a pot of beans, and a pitcher of water with 2 tin cups. I wasn't expecting company when I left this morning," Liam said, setting her satchel down carefully. His cheeks flushed pink as he gestured to the modest meal. "But you're welcome to whatever's here." Sarah looked around the kitchen, taking in the neat stack of firewood by the stove, the row of cast iron pans hanging from hooks, the single window with its clean, if somewhat worn, curtain. Everything spoke of a solitary life, carefully maintained but missing something essential. Or someone. The silence stretched between them, filled with all the things neither of them knew how to say. They were strangers who had just pledged their lives to each other, thrown together by circumstance and desperation and perhaps a touch of providence. Sarah's fingers found the brass ring on her left hand, turning it slowly around her finger as she tried to make sense of how her life had changed so completely in the space of a single morning. The lamplight cast dancing shadows across the small kitchen as Sarah and Liam settled into their seats at the wooden table. The flame flickered behind its glass chimney, making their shadows leap and sway on the whitewashed walls. Outside, darkness had settled over the prairie like a thick blanket, bringing with it the night sounds of crickets and distant coyotes. Sarah perched carefully on the narrow wooden chair, acutely aware of how it creaked beneath her weight. The borrowed calico dress felt tight across her shoulders as she reached for the tin cup of water, her new brass ring catching the lamplight. Her stomach churned with too many emotions to name, the day's humiliation still burning fresh in her mind. The bread and beans on her plate remained largely untouched. Across the table, Liam cleared his throat softly. His fingers worried at the edge of his cup as he searched for words. I usually start the day before sunrise, he began, his voice quiet but earnest. Got to milk the cow and feed the chickens first thing. Sarah nodded, grateful for the practical topic. I can help with that. I know my way around farm chores. You don't have to ... double quotes, Liam started, then stopped himself. A flush crept up his neck as he considered his next words. That is, you're welcome to help if you'd like. But don't feel obliged on account of ... He gestured vaguely between them, the wedding ring on his own finger glinting in the lamplight. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft tick of the mantel clock and the pop of burning wood in the cook stove. Sarah forced herself to take a small bite of bread, though it felt like sawdust in her mouth. She couldn't help but notice how Liam's own plate was barely touched, his fork pushing the beans around aimlessly. About sleeping arrangements, Liam said suddenly, as if the words had been building up inside him. His face reddened further as Sarah's eyes met his. I've made up the bedroom proper for you. Clean sheets and everything. I'll take my blanket out here by the fire. Sarah's heart clenched at his words. She set her fork down carefully, trying to keep her voice steady. We're man and wife now, Mr. Boone. I wouldn't want to put you out of your own bed, Liam, he corrected softly. And it's no trouble. It wouldn't be right taking advantage ... double quotes. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Taking advantage? Sarah's voice wavered slightly. You saved me from shame today. I'm the one who's grateful for your kindness. Though I don't understand why you did it. Liam's eyes dropped to his plate. It wasn't right, what they did to you in that church. A person's words ain't measured by their size. His words were quiet, but carried a surprising firmness. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't cry, not now. Still, she insisted, I won't have you sleeping on the floor like a hired hand. We made vows before God and man today, and I mean to honor those vows, Liam said, his face so red now it nearly matched his copper-colored hair. But you've been through enough today. The bedroom is yours, Mrs. Boone. Sarah, please. The way he said her name, soft and respectful, made something flutter in her chest. She wanted to argue further, but could see the determination in his downcast eyes. You're a good man, Liam Boone, she said instead. He looked up then, meeting her gaze for a brief moment before ducking his head again. Reckon we should say grace, he mumbled, changing the subject. Better late than never? Sarah bowed her head as Liam's rough hands clasped together. His prayer was halting but sincere, thanking the Lord for the food before them and asking for guidance in their new life together. The words new life together made Sarah's heart skip a beat, though she kept her eyes firmly closed until the quiet amen. The rest of the meal passed in relative silence, broken only by the occasional scrape of fork against plate or the distant howl of a coyote. Sarah found herself studying the kitchen around them when the quiet grew too heavy. Shelves lined one wall, holding an assortment of well-worn tools and cooking implements. Everything had its place, speaking to years of solitary living and careful habits. A single quilt hung over the back of a rocking chair in the corner. Its pattern faded, but the stitching still neat and strong. Sarah wondered if it had been made by Liam's mother, but she didn't dare ask. There would be time enough for learning each other's histories. When they finished eating, Sarah insisted on washing the dishes despite Liam's protests. Her hands found comfort in the familiar task, scrubbing the plates clean in the basin while Liam awkwardly dried them with a threadbare towel. Their fingers brushed once as she handed him a cup, and both quickly pulled away as if burned. Later, alone in her bedroom now, Sarah sat on the edge of the narrow bed, still fully dressed. The room was plain but neat, like everything else in the house. A bureau stood against one wall, its surface bare except for a small mirror and a worn Bible. The window looked out onto the dark prairie, and Sarah could see stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds on black cloth. She shifted, and the bed frame creaked beneath her. Everything in this house seemed too small, too delicate for someone of her size. Or perhaps she was simply too aware of herself, after a day of being stared at and whispered about. The memory of those cruel laughs in the church made her wrap her arms around herself, trying to take up less space through the closed door. She could hear Liam moving around in the main room, the floorboards groaning softly under his feet. The sound of him laying out his blanket near the hearth made her chest ache with a peculiar mixture of gratitude and sadness. He was trying to be honorable, she knew that, but part of her couldn't help wondering if he was also relieved to have an excuse not to share a bed with her. Sarah slipped off her shoes and lay back on the bed, still fully clothed in her borrowed wedding dress. The ceiling above her was lost in shadows, but she stared up at it anyway, listening to the pop and crackle of the fire in the other room. Was she merely a charity case to him? A good deed done by a kind man who couldn't bear to see her humiliated? Out in the main room, Liam lay on his blanket before the hearth, one arm tucked behind his head as he gazed up at the rough-hewn rafters. The firelight played across his features as he considered the magnitude of what he'd done that day. Standing up in church had been pure instinct. He couldn't bear to watch such cruelty visited upon anyone, let alone someone as gentle-seeming as Sarah Jane Miller. But now he was a husband, responsible for another soul besides his own. The thought terrified him, even as it filled him with a strange sort of peace. He'd prayed for years for a wife, for someone to share his life with, though he'd never imagined it happening quite like this. "Lord," he whispered into the quiet room, "help me be the man she needs. Help me not to fail her." The fire popped in response, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, a night bird called, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered. The sounds of the prairie night filled the silence between two people, now bound together, each lying awake and wondering what tomorrow would bring. The rooster's crow pierced the gray dawn, startling Sarah from her light sleep. She had dozed fitfully through the night, still wearing yesterday's dress, her mind racing with thoughts of proving herself useful in her new home. The familiar sound of the rooster brought comfort. Some things remained the same. Even when everything else had changed, Sarah eased herself quietly from the bed, careful not to let the springs creak too loudly. Through the window, she could see Liam's form already moving toward the barn, his shoulders hunched against the morning chill. Her heart quickened at the sight of him. Her husband now, though the words still felt strange on her tongue in the kitchen. She found the remains of last night's fire still warm in the cook stove. Sarah added kindling and small logs, working the flames back to life with practiced movements. The routine of domestic tasks steadied her nerves. She had learned early in life that keeping busy was the best remedy for an anxious heart. The coffee pot was easy enough to find, hanging on its hook beside the stove. Sarah measured the grounds carefully. She'd noticed Liam had them stored in a tin labeled in neat handwriting. As the coffee began to bubble, she discovered yesterday's bread and set it to warm. The kitchen slowly filled with the comforting aroma of coffee and toasted bread. The back door opened with a gentle squeak, and Liam stepped inside. He stopped short at the sight of her working at his stove, his eyes widening slightly. The surprise on his face made Sarah's stomach clench. Had she overstepped? "Good morning," she said softly, gesturing to the pot. "Coffee's nearly ready. You didn't have to double quotes," Liam started, then seemed to think better of it. A shy smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Sure, smells good, though." Sarah busied herself with pouring 2 cups, grateful for the task that kept her hands occupied. She'd found some biscuits in the pantry and warmed those too. Arranging them on a plate between their cups at the small table, Liam took his first bite and made a sound of appreciation that brought color to Sarah's cheeks. "These biscuits," he said, "they're right tasty. Been a while since I had anything but my own tough ones." "Thank you," Sarah replied, warmth spreading through her chest at his praise. It was such a small thing, but after yesterday's humiliation, even this simple compliment felt like a balm to her wounded spirit. They finished breakfast in companionable silence, the morning sun streaming through the windows and painting golden squares on the worn floorboards. When the last crumbs had been cleared away, Liam cleared his throat. "Thought I might show you around the place," he offered. "If you're of a mind to see it." Sarah nodded eagerly. "I'd like that very much." Outside, the morning air was crisp and clean. carrying the sweet scent of prairie grass. Liam led her past the barn, pointing out the chicken coop and the tool shed. Beyond the immediate buildings, Sarah could see cattle grazing in the distance, dark shapes moving slowly against the green backdrop of cottonwood trees. "Corral needs some work," Liam said, gesturing to where several rails hung loose from their posts. "Been meaning to get to it, but there's always something needs doing." Sarah studied the fence, noting the way the wood had weathered and split. "I could help," she offered, then added quickly when she saw his surprised look. "I'm stronger than I look." Liam's expression softened. "Reckon you are at that." He hesitated, then added, "But you don't have to prove nothing to me." "I want to help," Sarah insisted. "This is my home now, too, isn't it?" Something flickered in Liam's eyes. Pleasure, perhaps, at hearing her claim the ranch as home. He nodded slowly. "All right, then. Let me fetch the tools." Sarah rolled up her sleeves, determined to show she meant what she'd said. When Liam returned with hammers and nails, she took hold of a fallen rail without waiting to be asked. It was heavy, but she lifted it steady and true, holding it in place while Liam worked to secure it. The morning passed in shared labor. Sarah's arms began to ache, unused to such work, but she refused to complain. She noticed Liam watching her from the corner of his eye, his expression a mixture of concern and growing respect. When she managed to lift and hold a particularly heavy post without assistance, she caught the flash of admiration in his glance. "Water barrels are running low," Liam commented as they paused to rest. "Creek's not far, but it's a chore getting them filled." Sarah wiped sweat from her brow, leaving a smudge of dirt across her forehead. "We can do that next, if you like." The sun climbed higher as they worked together, taking turns at the pump to fill the barrels. Sarah's dress was soon stained with dust and sweat, but she found she didn't mind. Here, unlike in town, her size was an advantage. She could carry heavy buckets without struggling, could brace fence posts while Liam hammered them secured as afternoon faded toward evening. They finished the last of the urgent repairs. Sarah's muscles trembled with exhaustion, but satisfaction filled her chest. She had proven useful, needed even. The ranch's demands were many, but she had met them without flinching. Liam suggested they rest on the porch while the day cooled into dusk. Sarah sank gratefully onto the wooden steps, not caring that her dress was dirty or that wisps of hair had escaped her bun. Beside her, Liam settled with a quiet groan, his own clothes bearing the marks of their shared labor. The sky began to paint itself in shades of pink and gold, the setting sun throwing long shadows across the prairie grass. Dust motes danced in the last rays of light, and somewhere in the distance a meadowlark called its evening song. "I've prayed for someone like you," Liam said, suddenly, his voice so soft Sarah almost missed it. When she turned to look at him, his eyes were fixed on the horizon, his profile outlined in rose gold light. "Someone strong enough to handle ranch life. It ain't easy out here. Takes grit and determination. Most folks don't understand that." Sarah's heart thundered in her chest. She looked down at her dirty hands, calloused now from the day's work. "In town, they only saw my size as something to mock," she admitted quietly. "They never thought it might be useful. Their loss," Liam said firmly. Then, softer, "Their foolishness." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. But these were different from yesterday's tears of shame. For the first time in longer than she could remember, someone was seeing her truly, not as a burden or an object of ridicule, but as a person of worth and capability. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky continued its colorful display, neither feeling the need to fill the quiet with words. The day's shared work had done more to bridge the gap between them than any amount of talking could have. Sarah felt the ache in her muscles and knew she would be sore tomorrow, but she welcomed it. Each twinge was proof that she belonged here, that she could be more than just a charity case or an unwanted bride dot. As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah stole a glance at Liam. His face was peaceful, tired but content. She realized that while she had been trying to prove herself to him, he had been showing her something too, that sometimes the greatest kindness comes not in grand gestures, but in the simple act of giving someone the chance to be themselves. The morning sun beat down on Main Street as Liam guided their wagon into town. A week of working side by side had settled them into a comfortable rhythm on the ranch. But Sarah felt her stomach tighten as they approached the cluster of wooden buildings. The last time she'd been here, she'd fled from the church in shame. Sarah smoothed her clean calico dress, grateful at least that today she came as a proper wife rather than a rejected bride. Liam's steady presence beside her helped calm her nerves, though she noticed how his hands tightened on the reins when the first townspeople spotted them. The whispers started immediately. They floated from the boardwalk like autumn leaves, drifting past Sarah's ears as she kept her gaze fixed ahead. There goes Virgin Boone in his desperate choice. Poor man. Saddled himself with that one ... Reckon he was lonely enough to take anything ... Sarah's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin higher. Liam's jaw clenched, but he said nothing as he helped her down from the wagon in front of Henderson's mercantile. His hand lingered supportively at her elbow before he turned to tie up the horses. The bell above the door jingled as they entered the store. Mrs. Henderson stood behind the counter, her thin face pinched with barely concealed disdain. Sarah focused on their shopping list, moving purposefully through the aisles while Liam discussed feed prices with Mr. Henderson. 20 pounds of flour. Please, Sarah requested politely when she reached the counter. And 5 pounds of sugar ... double quotes. Mrs. Henderson's lips twisted as she measured out the items. My, she muttered, loud enough to carry. Quite an appetite to feed. Poor Liam, marrying desperation like he did. But I suppose even burden bearers need someone to cook their meals? Sarah's hands trembled as she counted out coin. But she forced herself to meet Mrs. Henderson's gaze. The flour's for baking bread to share with neighbors in need, she said quietly. My mama taught me charity starts at home. Mrs. Henderson's face flushed, and she turned away without responding. Sarah gathered their purchases, holding her dignity around her like armor. Outside, Liam was loading sacks of feed into the wagon when a well-dressed man approached. His suit was city-cut, and he carried a leather portfolio that marked him as some kind of official. 2 other men in similar attire hung back, watching. Mr. Boone? The man's voice was clipped. Professional. I'm Theodore Maxwell. Surveyor for the Western Pacific Railroad Company. He produced a sheaf of papers from his portfolio. I'm here about your water rights to Cottonwood Creek. Sarah watched Liam's expression tighten as he took the documents. The creek was the ranch's lifeblood, providing water for their cattle and crops alike. Without it, the land would wither. These papers suggest your family's claim may be insufficient. Maxwell continued smoothly. The railroad requires that water source for our planned expansion through the territory. We'll be redirecting the creek's flow to service our steam engines. That creek's been Boone water since my pa first settled the land, Liam said, his voice low but firm. We've got the proper papers filed with the territory office. Maxwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. Yes, well, those claims will need to be defended in court. The company's lawyers will be filing their challenge next week. He glanced at Sarah, then back to Liam. I'd advise you to secure proper representation. Though I hear your recent domestic situation may complicate matters of testimony and respectability. Sarah felt the barb sink deep. Even as anger began to simmer in her chest. More townspeople had gathered to watch the exchange, their whispers growing bolder. Who believe anything sworn by that obese bride of his? Railroads got this wrapped up tight as a drum. Boone's gonna lose everything over this. Liam's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. Good day, Mr. Maxwell. We'll see you in court. He turned to help Sarah into the wagon, his movements gentle despite the tension evident in his shoulders. The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in thought as the wagon creaked along the rutted road. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the prairie grass, and Sarah could see the glint of Cottonwood Creek in the distance, flowing sweet and clear through their land out inside the ranch house. Liam spread the railroad's papers across the kitchen table. Sarah prepared coffee while he explained the situation in detail, how his father had secured the water rights 20 years ago, how the documentation was filed but could be challenged, how expensive lawyers would be to fight the railroad's claims. The surveyor was right about one thing. Liam said heavily, they'll try to discredit any testimony we give. The town already ... double quotes. He trailed off, unable to finish. Already mocks me, Sarah completed softly. And they'll use that to hurt our case. She sank into a chair, fear and guilt warring in her heart. I'm so sorry. Liam, I never meant to bring trouble to your door. No. Liam's voice was sharper than she'd ever heard it. Don't you apologize for other folks' cruelty? This ain't your doing. But if you'd married someone else, someone more acceptable to them ... double quotes, then I'd have married wrong. Liam moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her work-roughened hands in his. This past week, you've proved yourself 10 times over. Your strength, your kindness, your determination, that's worth more than all their nasty whispers. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. But the creek, the ranch, I can't bear to think I might cost you your legacy. Listen to me, Liam said firmly. This ranch ain't just my legacy anymore. It's ours. And we're going to fight for it together. No matter what anyone says. The sun had set, leaving only lamplight to illuminate the kitchen. Sarah could hear the distant murmur of the creek, like a prayer in the gathering dark. Without discussion, they both sank to their knees beside the table. Lord, Liam began, his voice rough with emotion, we need your guidance. Show us the path through this valley. Give us strength to face what's coming. Sarah's voice joined his, trembling but sincere. Help us stand firm against those who would take what's rightfully ours. Let truth prevail over prejudice. And Lord, Liam added softly, his hand finding hers, thank you for bringing us together. Whatever comes, we face it side by side. Amen, Sarah whispered, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. The strength of their joined fingers, they remained kneeling together in the quiet kitchen, the railroad's papers casting long shadows in the lamplight. Outside, the creek continued its steady flow, unaware of the threats gathering against it. But in that moment of shared prayer, Sarah felt something solid and sure take root in her heart, not just determination to fight, but faith in the partnership she and Liam were building, stronger than any whispered mockery or corporate greed. Let them come with their lawyers and their prejudices, she thought. They'd find that true grit came in all sizes, and that love, once granted, could stand against any storm. The day settled into a steady rhythm at the Boone Ranch, each sunrise bringing new tasks and quiet discoveries. Sarah rose before dawn, padding softly through the kitchen to start the day's bread rising. The yeast's earthy smell reminded her of childhood mornings in her father's house. Though those memories now felt distant as dreams dot in the kitchen garden, Sarah found peace among the neat rows of vegetables. She pulled weeds with careful hands, remembering which plants her mother had taught her to tend. The tomatoes needed staking, their vines heavy with green fruit. Carrots pushed their feathery tops through dark soil, and peas climbed the twine she'd strung between stakes. The hot wind whipped sheets and shirts on the clothesline, and Sarah worked quickly to pin each piece before it could escape her grasp. Her own calico dresses flapped alongside Liam's work shirts, the sight giving her an odd flutter of contentment. The domestic intimacy of caring for his clothes felt both strange and right. Near the barn, she heard the rhythmic sound of Liam's work. He knelt beside the wagon, replacing a cracked wheel with practiced movements. Sarah approached with a dipper of fresh water, and he looked up with grateful eyes. Much obliged, he said softly, taking a long drink. His gaze lingered on her as she turned back to her tasks, and something warm bloomed in his chest watching her capable hands at work. Got the cow. A gentle Jersey named Buttercup proved to be Sarah's greatest challenge and triumph. The first morning she attempted milking, her fingers fumbled with the unfamiliar motion. But she persisted, speaking soothingly to the animal until she found the right rhythm. Now, after a week's practice, the milk streamed steadily into the pail while Buttercup contentedly chewed her cud. You've got away with her, Liam observed one morning, pausing in the barn doorway. Took me twice as long to learn that skill. Sarah smiled, pleased by the praise. She just needs patience is all. Same as most of us. The evening the ranch hands came to supper, Sarah felt her old nervousness return. Tom and Jake had worked the Boone Ranch for 3 seasons, and their opinion carried weight. She spent the afternoon preparing a hearty meal, beef stew thick with vegetables, cornbread dripping with honey butter, and an apple pie that filled the kitchen with cinnamon warmth. The men entered awkwardly, boots scraping on the porch boards. Their weather-worn faces showed clear surprise at the transformed kitchen. Curtains at the window, a clean tablecloth, fresh flowers in a jar. But it was the food that won them over. "Ma'am," Tom said after his first bite of stew, "this here's the finest meal I've had since leaving my mama's table in Tennessee." Jake nodded enthusiastically, already reaching for seconds. "Sure beats our usual beans and bacon." As they ate, Sarah shared stories about growing up in her father's general store. She described the traveling peddlers who brought news from distant cities, the time a bear wandered into town and got drunk on fermented apples, the community celebrations when the railroad first came through. Her warm voice and easy laughter filled the kitchen, and even Liam found himself chuckling at her tales. "Reckon we got lucky with you, Mrs. Boone," Jake said as he savored the last crumbs of pie. Ranch was needing a woman's touch, something fierce. After the men departed, Liam suggested they walk the fence line before full dark. The evening air carried the sweet scent of prairie grass, and crickets were beginning their nightly chorus. They walked in comfortable silence until Liam stopped at the wagon, where he kept his tools. "Been meaning to show you something," he said, retrieving a Winchester single-action rifle. "With coyotes getting bold lately, you ought to know how to handle this." Sarah eyed the weapon uncertainly. "I've never fired a gun before. No time like now to learn." Liam's voice was gentle as he showed her how to hold the rifle, explaining each part and its purpose. "Keep the stock tight against your shoulder, like this." His hands were warm as they adjusted her grip. Sarah drew a steadying breath and squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, startling a meadowlark from its perch. But on her second try, she hit the fence post Liam had marked as a target. The sound of impact was deeply satisfying. "Well done." Liam's face lit with pride before he quickly looked away, color rising in his cheeks. But Sarah had seen the shine in his eyes, and it warmed her more than any summer sun. Later that night, Sarah sat in the lamplight's golden circle, mending a tear in one of Liam's work shirts. Her needle moved in steady rhythm as she hummed an old hymn. Amazing Grace, the tune rising soft and clear in the quiet house. The familiar words brought comfort, speaking of redemption and hope. Liam sat in his chair by the fire, pretending to read but actually watching Sarah's hands move across the fabric. The lamplight softened her features, catching golden highlights in her brown hair. Her humming filled the room with peace, and he felt something shift in his heart, a deepening of the affection that had been growing these past weeks. He found himself noticing things about her more and more. The graceful way she moved despite her size, her gentle laugh, the intelligence in her eyes when she spoke of books or ranch management. Her presence had transformed not just the house, but the very atmosphere of the ranch. Where once there had been lonely silence, now there was warmth and life. The hymn ended, and Sarah held up the mended shirt for inspection. "There," she said with satisfaction. "Good as new. Thank you," Liam said softly, meaning far more than just the mending. Sarah smiled, understanding in her eyes. "You're welcome," she replied, and returned to her work, starting another hymn as her needle flashed in the lamplight. Outside, a coyote called in the distance, but inside the ranch house, all was warm and peaceful. The evening wrapped around them like a familiar quilt, comfortable in its simplicity, rich with unspoken promise. The July sun beat down mercilessly on the Boone Ranch, turning the grass brittle and brown. Each morning, Sarah watched the creek shrink further, its waters retreating like hope beneath the relentless heat. Dust coated every surface, settling on windowsills and floating in sunbeams despite her daily sweeping. From the kitchen window, she could hear the distressed lowing of cattle gathering around the depleted water troughs. The sound twisted her heart, knowing how the poor beasts suffered. Liam spent hours checking water levels, his shoulders growing tenser with each passing day. One evening, he slumped into his chair at the supper table, defeat etched on his sun-weathered face. "Creek's down to a trickle," he said, pushing food around his plate. "If this keeps up, we'll lose half the herd by month's end." Sarah set down her fork, mind working. What about the spring in Morrison's Canyon? Tom mentioned it yesterday. Says it's still running strong. Liam shook his head. It's nearly 4 miles away. By the time we'd haul enough water back, then we'll make multiple trips, Sarah said firmly. We'll take both wagons, fill every barrel we own. Tom and Jake can help. Between the 4 of us, we could maintain a steady rotation. Sarah, that's backbreaking work in this heat. You shouldn't what? Her chin lifted. Work alongside my husband to save our ranch. These past weeks have proven I'm strong enough. Liam studied her face, seeing the determination there. Finally, he nodded. We'll start tomorrow, first light. Dawn found them loading empty barrels onto 2 wagons. Sarah had risen early to pack food and water for the day. Bread, cheese, dried beef, and jugs of drinking water wrapped in wet burlap to stay cool. She wore her oldest dress and a wide-brimmed bonnet. Ready for hard work, the first trip to Morrison's Canyon tested everyone's endurance. The spring bubbled from a rocky outcropping, its clear water a blessing in the parched landscape. Filling the barrels took time. They had to form a bucket line. Passing water up from the spring to where the wagons waited, Sarah threw herself into the work without complaint. Her arms ached from lifting buckets, and sweat soaked through her dress, but she kept going. Tom and Jake exchanged impressed glances when she hefted a full bucket as easily as they did. The return journey was even harder, with loaded wagons creeping across rough ground. Every jolt threatened to slosh precious water over the barrel rims. Sarah drove one wagon, while Liam handled the other, both of them watching the trail with intense concentration. By mid-morning, word had spread about their water hauling operation. The Hendersons from the neighboring ranch rode over to investigate. Sarah saw the surprise on their faces when they found her working alongside the men. But she just nodded greeting and kept passing buckets. Could use some help, she called to them, voice matter of fact. More hands mean faster trips. Mrs. Henderson hesitated only a moment before dismounting. I'll fetch our wagon, she said. Her husband looked uncomfortable, but followed her lead as the sun climbed higher. More neighbors arrived. The Petersons brought 2 wagons and their teenage sons. Old Widow McCarthy couldn't haul water, but she arrived with a basket of fresh biscuits and took charge of keeping everyone fed. Hydrated. Sarah organized them into teams, establishing a rotation so no one grew too exhausted. Her natural efficiency impressed even those who had previously whispered about her in town. She worked as hard as anyone, her size proving an advantage in steadying heavy barrels and managing stubborn horses. The day passed in a blur of dust, sweat, and determination. By sunset, they had completed 5 full runs, delivering enough water to fill all the troughs and provide a small reserve. The cattle crowded around the water, their grateful drinking sounds the sweetest music Sarah had ever heard. As twilight painted the sky in purples and golds. The neighbors departed with promises to return tomorrow. Many clasped Sarah's hand warmly, respect evident in their eyes. Mrs. Henderson even hugged her, whispering, "You're a godsend to this community." Sarah Boone. Finally alone, Sarah and Liam collapsed onto the porch steps. Their faces were streaked with dust and sweat, clothes filthy from the day's labor. Sarah's muscles trembled with exhaustion, but satisfaction filled her heart. "Lord, I'm grateful for every pound right now," she said with a tired laugh, rubbing her sore arms. Turns out being built sturdy has its advantages when it comes to hauling water buckets. Liam turned to her, his expression serious despite his smile. "You were built for this life, Sarah. Not just your strength, though God knows that's a blessing, but your spirit. Your way of bringing folks together, making them want to help." He paused, voice softening. "I thank the Lord every day you said yes in that church." Sarah's breath caught at the genuine admiration in his voice. No one had ever spoken of her that way before, seeing past her size to the person within. Emotion tightened her throat as she looked at this quiet man who had changed her life. The evening breeze cooled their heated skin as darkness settled over the ranch. Cricket song filled the air, and stars began appearing in the velvet sky. Neither spoke for a long while, content in the peaceful moment. Then, with hesitant gentleness, Liam's hand found hers on the porch step. His calloused fingers intertwined with her work-roughened ones, the simple touch more intimate than any words. Sarah's heart quickened, but she remained still, savoring the warmth of his hand and all it represented. They sat together in the gathering night, hands clasped, while all around them the ranch settled into evening rhythms. The cattle lowed softly in their pasture, cicadas hummed in the grass, and a distant coyote called to the rising moon. In that moment, Sarah felt truly at home, not just on the ranch, but in her own skin, with this man who saw her true worth. The evening air held the sweet scent of autumn as Sarah pulled 3 fresh-baked apple pies from the oven. Steam rose from the golden crusts, carrying the warm perfume of cinnamon and nutmeg through the kitchen. She had spent hours preparing for the church supper, determined to contribute something special. Those smell like heaven itself, Liam said from the doorway, already dressed in his Sunday best. His shy smile warmed her heart as she carefully wrapped each pie in cloths. "Let's pray they taste as good as they smell," Sarah replied, smoothing her dress. She had taken extra care with her appearance tonight, wearing the blue calico she had sewn herself. The fabric was sturdy but pretty, with tiny white flowers scattered across it like stars. The wagon ride to town was quiet, both of them lost in thought. Sarah held the pies steady in her lap, while Liam handled the reins with careful attention. The setting sun painted the prairie grass in shades of gold and amber, promising a beautiful harvest moon later. When they arrived at the church, lanterns already glowed in the windows. Preacher Matthews greeted them at the door, his kind face creased with welcome. "So good to see you both," he said, helping Sarah with her pies. "We're hoping this supper will bring folks together in Christian fellowship." The church basement was crowded with ranch families, tables groaning under the weight of covered dishes. Sarah set her pies among the other desserts, trying to ignore the sideways glances from some of the women. She busied herself helping arrange plates and cups, grateful for the task. Little Mary Peterson tugged at her skirt. "Miss Sarah, did you bring apple pie?" "Your apple pie is the best." Sarah's heart lightened as she smiled down at the child. "I surely did, sweetheart. You'll be first in line when dessert time comes." Elder Red Elk sat in a corner, dignified in his traditional clothing. He nodded respectfully to Sarah as she passed, and she returned the gesture. His presence reminded her of the upcoming water rights hearing, sending a flutter of anxiety through her stomach. Preacher Matthews called everyone to order with a loud clearing of his throat. "Let us bow our heads and thank the Lord for this bounty and fellowship." The meal began pleasantly enough. Sarah's cooking earned genuine praise, especially from the children who had come to love her treats. Even Mrs. Henderson, who had once been cool toward her, commented on the perfect flakiness of her pie crust, but underneath the surface politeness, whispers circulated like snakes in the grass. Sarah caught fragments as she moved between tables, each one striking like a tiny dart. Poor Liam, taking her out of pity, ... Convenient timing. With the water dispute coming up, ... Who'd believe his claim with her by his side? She kept her head high, though her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee. These were the same voices that had mocked her at that first failed wedding, now finding new reasons to judge. The worst moment came when Frank Wilson, the saloon keeper, cornered Liam near the dessert table. Sarah was close enough to hear every word, though they couldn't see her behind the kitchen door. "Look here, Boone," Wilson said, in a low voice. "The railroad's willing to be generous. $500 cash to drop your claim. That's good money for a struggling rancher." Liam's voice was quiet but firm. "The water rights have been in my family for 3 generations. Mr. Wilson, they're not for sale. Don't be a fool, boy." Wilson's tone turned nasty. "You think anyone will take you serious at that hearing? A virgin rancher with a fat wife won't win you land. Take the money while it's offered." Sarah's heart clenched, the familiar shame flooding back. She pressed herself against the wall, fighting tears that threatened to spill. "Mr. Wilson," Liam's voice had changed, taking on a steel she had never heard before. "You will not speak of my wife that way. Not now, not ever. And you can tell the railroad their money's no good here?" Sarah heard Wilson sputter and storm away. She quickly wiped her eyes and stepped back into the main room, not wanting Liam to know she had overheard. But the words echoed in her mind through the rest of the evening, poisoning what should have been a pleasant gathering. Harvest moon hung low and golden in the sky as they began their ride home. Sarah sat quietly beside Liam, her hands folded in her lap. The wagon wheels creaked a steady rhythm, and crickets chirped in the tall grass alongside the road. Finally, the words spilled out. "I heard what Mr. Wilson said," she whispered. About me being the reason you might lose the water rights." Liam's hands tightened on the reins. "Sarah, ... No, please let me finish." She took a deep breath. "I know folks think you married me out of pity, or that I'm some kind of burden you took on. And now they're using me against you in this dispute, and I just ... Her voice broke slightly. "I couldn't bear it if I caused you to lose your land." Liam pulled the wagon to a stop. In the moonlight, his face was serious as he turned to her. "The truth is, I'm the one afraid of letting you down," he admitted softly. "This land, this water, it's all I have to offer you. If I can't even protect that ... double quote," Sarah reached out, resting her hand on his arm. The wool of his Sunday coat felt rough under her fingers. "That's not true," she said. "You offered me dignity when others only gave scorn. You offered me a home when I had nowhere else to go." She paused, gathering courage. "I believe God brought us together for a reason, Liam. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." The moonlight silvered his face as he covered her hand with his own. They sat in silence for a long moment, drawing strength from each other's presence. The night air carried the scent of autumn grass and distant wood smoke, while stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. Finally, Liam clicked to the horses and they continued their journey home. No more words were needed. The simple touch of their joined hands spoke volumes, a quiet defiance against those who would judge their union. The ranch house appeared ahead, a darker shape against the night sky. Sarah felt peace settle over her, despite the hurts of the evening. Let them whisper and scheme. She knew the truth in her heart. She and Liam had found something real, something that went deeper than appearance or convenience. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them side by side, their faith and trust in each other growing stronger with each passing day. The late summer morning dawned clear and bright. Sarah watched Liam load a wicker basket into the wagon, his movements more relaxed than she'd seen in weeks. The strain of the water dispute had worn on them both, but today they'd agreed to set aside their worries for a few precious hours. "My mother used to pack picnics just like this," Liam said, helping Sarah onto the wagon seat. His voice held a warmth she rarely heard when he spoke of family. The horses ambled down the familiar trail to the creek, their hooves raising small puffs of dust. The creek burbled peacefully, its waters reflecting the cloudless sky. Tall cottonwoods provided patches of cool shade, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. Sarah spread a worn quilt on a grassy spot while Liam tethered the horses. "This is lovely," she said, arranging bread, cheese, and fresh apples from their small orchard. "I can't remember the last time I just sat and enjoyed the day." Liam settled beside her, closer than usual. "Ma loved this spot. Said it was where Pa courted her." He picked up a blade of grass, twirling it between his fingers. "She'd bring me here after he passed, tell me stories about their early days." Sarah watched his face soften with memory. "Tell me about her." "She was gentle but strong, like you in that way." He glanced at her briefly, then back at the creek. "When she took sick, I was 17. Nursed her best I could, but ... double quotes," he swallowed hard. "After she was gone, the ranch felt so empty. Guess I got used to being alone. Too shy to court anyone proper." Sarah touched his arm lightly. "I understand loneliness." She took a deep breath, finding courage in his openness. "Back home, I used to watch other girls get courted, married. Started believing maybe I wasn't meant for love. That I was too ... Too much, Sarah." Liam turned to face her fully, his eyes intense. "Not too much. You're exactly right." His voice grew husky. "I want you. Have since that day in church, when everyone else saw what they wanted to see. But I saw you." Her heart thundered in her chest. Liam ... He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. Instead, she closed the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, uncertain, then deepened with growing confidence. When they parted, both were blushing, but smiling. "I reckon that was worth waiting for," Liam whispered, making Sarah laugh softly. They spent the afternoon sharing stories between kisses, feeding each other bits of bread and cheese, their earlier awkwardness melting away. The sun was lowering when they finally packed up the basket and headed home. Their contentment shattered the moment they saw the railroad company's rider leaving their yard. A letter waited on the porch, its official seal glinting ominously in the fading light. Inside, Liam's hands shook as he read the documents. "No," he muttered. "No, this can't be right." Sarah moved closer, reading over his shoulder. The papers showed a preliminary agreement signed by Liam's father years ago, granting the railroad future access to part of the creek. The signature was unmistakable. "Pa never told me," Liam said, his voice hollow. "Why wouldn't he tell me about this?" He strode onto the porch, papers crumpled in his fist. Sarah watched through the window as he paced, running his hands through his hair in distress. The joy of their afternoon seemed to evaporate like morning dew. Sarah sank into her kitchen chair, feeling the ground shift beneath her newfound happiness. The railroad's claim now had legal weight. Their future, which had seemed so bright just hours ago, suddenly felt uncertain as shadow. She wanted to go to him, to offer comfort, but she sensed he needed space to wrestle with this betrayal of trust. The sound of his boots on the porch boards marked time like a pendulum as evening crept in. Sarah lit the lamp and waited, her heart aching for the man she was coming to love. While dark doubts gathered like storm clouds on their horizon, Sarah moved through the next days like her hands continuing their work while her heart grew heavier. The morning sun found her feeding chickens, gathering eggs with mechanical precision. By afternoon, she hauled water and mended clothes, each motion precise but empty of joy. The evening saw her preparing meals that grew quieter with each passing day. Liam noticed the change in her. Where before she had hummed while working, now silence filled their home. Her smiles, once warming their shared moments, became rare and fleeting. Even the ranch hands commented on the absence of her usual cheerful greetings. The news about the railroad's document had struck deeper than either of them first realized. It wasn't just about the water rights anymore. It had reopened wounds that hadn't properly healed. In town. The whispers grew louder. Sarah heard them clearly when she visited the mercantile for supplies. "Poor thing," one woman said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Just a convenient shield for his water dispute." Another added, "He'll cast her aside once this is settled." Each word lodged in Sarah's heart like thorns. She kept her head high, paid for her purchases, and left without betraying her pain. But inside, doubt gnawed at her conscience. One particularly harsh evening, Sarah stood by the barn door, about to bring in fresh straw for the horses. Voices drifted from inside, the ranch hands taking shelter from the setting sun. "Reckon the boss had it all figured," one said. Who'd question a man fighting for his new bride's future? "Ain't natural, though," another replied. Man like him suddenly wedding the biggest girl in the territory? Had to be strategy. Sarah's hands trembled on the straw basket. The words confirmed her deepest fears, the ones that woke her in the night and haunted her quiet moments. The basket slipped from her grip, spilling across the dirt. She backed away, vision blurring with tears. The barn's interior offered sanctuary, and she found herself in an empty stall, sinking down onto a hay bale. In the dimness, she finally let her tears fall freely. The pain of that first wedding day came rushing back. The cruel laughter, the rejection, the burning shame. Had Liam truly wanted her, or had he simply seen an opportunity? The thought twisted in her chest like a knife. Time passed, marked only by her quiet sobs and the distant lowing of cattle. She didn't hear the barn door creak open, didn't notice Liam's presence until his shadow fell across the straw-strewn floor. "Sarah?" His voice was soft, concerned. "I've been looking for you." She tried to wipe away her tears, but they kept coming. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice betrayed her. Liam knelt before her, his face etched with worry. "No, you're not. Please, tell me what's wrong." The words burst from her like water from a broken dam. Why did you do it, Liam? Why did you really marry me? Her voice cracked. You could have had any slender girl in town. Why chain yourself to me? The question hung in the air between them, heavy as storm clouds. Liam's face showed pain, then understanding, then a deeper anguish she hadn't expected. Chain myself, he repeated softly. Is that what you think? Sarah gestured helplessly at herself. Look at me. Everyone knows I'm too big, too plain. They say I'm just a pawn in your fight for the water rights. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Maybe they're right. Liam sat beside her on the hay bale, his shoulders slumped. Then I failed you, he said quietly. Failed to show you what I see when I look at you. His admission surprised her enough to quiet her tears. What do you mean? I'm not good with words, he began, twisting his hat in his hands. Never have been. Makes folks think I'm simple sometimes. But I've watched you these past weeks, Sarah. His voice grew stronger. I've seen how you face each day with courage, how you work without complaint, how you bring light into every room you enter. He turned to face her directly. You think I could have had any other girl? Truth is, I was too shy to court anyone. Spent years alone, praying God would send me someone strong enough for this life. Someone with a heart big enough to love this hard land. His voice softened. Then there you were, standing in that church, showing more dignity than anyone I'd ever seen. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. But your father's agreement with the railroad ... has nothing to do with why I married you, Liam finished firmly. I married you because you were an answer to my prayers, though I was too blind to see it at first. He looked down at his rough hands. Truth is, I'm the one who feels inadequate. I'm not educated like you, not well-spoken. I fear I'll fail you as a husband, fail to protect you from cruel words and harder times. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Sarah reached out slowly, taking one of his calloused hands in hers. You haven't failed me, she whispered. Nor you me, he replied, squeezing her hand gently. Whatever comes with this hearing, we'll face it together. Not because we're chained to each other, but because God brought us together for a purpose. They sat in the growing darkness, hands clasped, each drawing strength from the other's presence. Outside, a whip-poor-will called, its lonely song echoing across the ranch. The sound reminded Sarah of their shared solitude, not as a burden now, but as something precious and fragile, yet even as Liam's words soothed her immediate fears, Sarah couldn't completely shake the weight of uncertainty. The railroad's hearing loomed ahead of them, a shadow on their horizon. The document bearing Liam's father's signature seemed to mock their newfound understanding, threatening to tear apart not just their land rights, but their tender bond. Liam helped her to her feet, brushing hay from her skirt with gentle hands. Come inside, he said softly. It's getting cold out here. They walked back to the house together, closer than before, but still carrying their individual burdens. The ranch hands' voices had faded, the evening chores complete. Only the wind whispered now, carrying the scent of sage and approaching autumn inside. The lamp cast a warm glow over their small kitchen, where dinner waited on the stove. Sarah moved to serve it, but Liam caught her hand. Let me, he said, and, for once, she allowed herself to be tended to. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the prairie grass in shades of amber and gold. Sarah stood in the doorway of their small ranch house, watching shadows stretch across the yard. Tomorrow would bring the hearing that could change everything. Her heart felt heavy, like the dark clouds gathering in the distant sky. Without a word to Liam, who dozed in his chair after a long day of preparation, she slipped on her shawl and stepped into a cooling evening air. Her feet carried her down the familiar path toward town, past the scattered homesteads and rolling pastures. The little white church stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its weathered boards glowing softly in the last light of day. Sarah's hand trembled as she pushed open the heavy wooden door. It creaked softly, the sound echoing in the empty sanctuary. Inside, the air held the lingering scent of morning services, beeswax candles, and well-worn hymnals. Her footsteps seemed too loud on the plank flooring as she made her way down the center aisle. This was where it all begun, where she had faced humiliation and where Liam had stepped forward to change both their lives. The memory of that day washed over her as she sank to her knees before the simple altar. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the west window, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the silence. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for what's coming." Her hands clasped together, so tight her knuckles whitened. These past months with Liam, they've been more than I ever dared hope for. But tomorrow, ... Her voice caught in her throat. Tears began to fall, dotting her skirt with dark spots. "Please, Lord, give me courage. Not just for myself, but for Liam. He's carried so much on his shoulders, trying to protect what his father built." She drew a shaky breath. "The townsfolk still whisper. They say I'm his burden, that I'll be the reason he loses everything." The church settled around her, creaking softly in the evening wind. Sarah continued her prayer, letting all her fears pour out in the sacred space. "I love him, Lord. I love him more than I thought possible. But I'm scared. What if the railroad wins? What if we lose the water rights? What if ... She swallowed hard. What if Liam realizes they were right about me all along?" Lost in her prayers, she didn't hear the door open behind her. She didn't notice the quiet footsteps approaching until a familiar presence settled beside her. Liam knelt on the hard wooden floor, his own hands folded in prayer. His face showed traces of worry and weariness, but his eyes held steady warmth when they met hers. "I've been looking for you," he said softly. "When I woke and found you gone, ... double quotes." He left the sentence unfinished. But Sarah could hear the concern in his voice. "I needed to pray," she explained, wiping at her tears with trembling fingers. "Tomorrow, ... I know." Liam's voice was gentle. He shifted slightly, his shoulder brushing against hers. "Mind if I join you?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. For a moment, they knelt in silence, the church growing darker around them as dusk deepened outside. Then Liam began to pray aloud, his voice low and hesitant at first. "Lord, I'm not good with fancy words. You know that better than anyone?" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I need to confess something, and Sarah needs to hear it too." Sarah turned to look at him, surprised by the raw emotion in his voice. "I've been afraid," he continued. "Not just about the hearing, though that weighs heavy enough. I've been afraid of not being enough, not educated enough, not wealthy enough, not worthy enough of the gift you gave me and Sarah." His voice cracked slightly. "All my life, I figured being alone was my lot. Figured nobody could want a quiet man who can barely string two words together in public." Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks as she listened to her husband's heart laid bare. "Before God, but then you brought Sarah into my life. And for the first time, I felt ... whole." Liam's hand found hers in the growing darkness. "Now I'm scared of failing her. Scared of losing everything my father built, everything I hoped to share with her. Scared she'll realize she deserved better than a simple rancher with more doubts than certainty." Sarah's fingers tightened around his as he spoke. Together, their prayers rose in the quiet sanctuary, sometimes whispered, sometimes broken by tears, but always honest. They prayed for strength, for wisdom, for justice. They prayed for their love to weather whatever storm approached as their words faded into silence. Something shifted in the air around them. It wasn't a dramatic change, no flash of lightning or voice from above. Instead, a quiet peace settled over them both, as gentle as evening dew on prairie grass. Sarah felt it first, a steadying of her spirit, a calming of the fears that had churned inside her all day. Beside her, she felt Liam's shoulders relax, his breathing becoming deeper and more even. They rose slowly from their knees, joints stiff from the hard floor. The church had grown dark around them, with only starlight filtering through the windows. Liam helped Sarah to her feet, his touch gentle but sure. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, though whether to God or Liam, she wasn't quite sure. "For what?" Liam asked, his voice equally soft in the darkness. "For finding me. For praying with me. For ... She gestured helplessly, trying to encompass everything she felt. "For being you." Liam's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away the remnants of her tears. "Sarah Jane Miller Boone," he said, using her full name with tender reverence. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Whatever comes tomorrow, that won't change." They stepped out of the church together into the cool night air. Above them, stars sparkled in the vast prairie sky, countless points of light in the darkness. The path home stretched before them, lit by starlight and a thin crescent moon. Sarah reached for Liam's hand as they walked, twining her fingers with his. The simple touch carried more meaning than any words could express. Trust, commitment, determination to face whatever came together. The evening wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and approaching autumn. Her fears hadn't vanished entirely. They still lurked at the edges of her mind like shadows at sunset. But something stronger had taken root in her heart, a quiet certainty that whatever the hearing brought, their bond would endure. God had brought them together in this very church, and here he had renewed their faith in his plan and in each other. The ranch house came into view, a darker shape against the star-filled sky. Light spilled from its windows, welcoming them home. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, Sarah felt ready to face them. She squeezed Liam's hand, drawing strength from his answering pressure. They were no longer two lonely souls seeking shelter from the world's cruelty. They had become something stronger, a union forged in faith, tested by trial, and sustained by love. Whatever the railroad hearing might bring, they would face it together. Their prayers still echoing in the night air behind them. The town hall buzzed with tension as ranchers, merchants, and railroad representatives packed the wooden benches. Sarah sat beside Liam, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The railroad agent's voice rang out, waving the yellowed document that bore Liam's father's signature. "This preliminary agreement clearly shows intent to grant water access," the agent declared. Worried glances passed between the assembled ranchers. When Sarah's name was called, she rose slowly. Her voice, clear and strong, carried to every corner of the room. "Folks here mock my size," she said, "but these hands haul water barrels daily. This body endures drought and labor alongside my husband." She gestured to her sturdy frame. "The Lord built me strong for a purpose, to work this land and protect what's right." Silence fell. Though some still sneered, others nodded with newfound respect. The judge peered over his spectacles, considering her words. "We'll hear additional witnesses," he announced. Elder Red Elk rose from his bench, his weathered face dignified in the lamplight. "The Boone family has honored our ways," he said, his voice carrying weight. "For many seasons, they shared water freely with my people, respecting the ancient boundaries. The Iron Horse brings only greed." The saloon keeper jumped up, face red. "This ain't about old treaties." "Sit down, Jenkins," several townsmen growled. They'd grown tired of railroad bribes poisoning their community. The judge adjusted his spectacles. "Having heard all testimony, I rule in favor of the Boone claim." Relief washed over Sarah's face. Liam squeezed her hand, his eyes bright with pride. As they stepped into the sunshine, neighbors who'd once whispered cruel jokes now approached with hesitant smiles. And, "Congratulations!" The wagon wheels crunched on gravel as Sarah and Liam pulled up to their ranch house. Golden lamplight spilled from the windows, and the smell of fresh bread wafted through the evening air. Neighbors streamed from their hiding spots, arms laden with covered dishes and jugs of sweet cider. The kitchen, once a place of awkward silence, now rang with genuine laughter. Sarah moved confidently between guests, serving bowls of steaming stew. Her smile reached her eyes, no trace of shame remaining in her bearing gut as the last visitors waved goodbye from their wagons. Liam drew Sarah close by the crackling hearth. "You're more than enough for me," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she finally accepted the truth of his words. They stood together, fingers intertwined, watching the flames dance, no longer two lonely souls, but partners bound by love, faith, and hard-won dignity. If today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow we'll meet right here, where love speaks softly and stays.